Mr. Thierry de Montbrial, President of IFRI, distinguished members of this institute, distinguished audience. It is a pleasure for me to join such a distinguished gathering this morning to discuss an issue of interest and importance to us all. The nature of the new order that will be created from our fast changing global reality. It is perhaps a coincidence, but nonetheless pertinent, that we should be discussing this subject only one day after the 10th anniversary of an event of far-reaching consequences, both geographically and politically, that spurred the fight against international terrorism and significantly changed some of the norms of international relations. But the changes brought about by 9/11 are just a part of the uncertainty in the global political economic environment over the last 20 years or so. This period has seen the rise of emerging and developing markets that have fundamentally changed the complexion of global trade relations, particularly in Africa. While the core group of these new global economic players is centered on the economies of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, commonly known as the BRICS, the process is much more widespread, reaching out to Africa. This trend is also accompanied by the relative decline of the G8 countries' economic supremacy and the rising influence of the G20, whose formation illustrates how economic development is now spread across continents and cultures. The ongoing global financial crisis, especially in the advanced economies, is bound to accelerate the pace of change even further. And more recently, demands for greater freedom and participation in national politics, especially what has come to be known as the Arab Spring, have shaken the existing order and created new realities. New information and communication technologies are bringing their own dynamics of change. Where previously socio-economic and political progress took years or even decades, social media tools are now contributing to the rapid exchange of ideas and information, as is seen in the protests across North Africa, the Middle East, and the recent riots in parts of Europe. Clearly, a new order is in the making. In the midst of these changes, therefore, the question that demands our attention, certainly for us in Africa, and Rwanda in particular, is what role we should play in contributing to shape this new order and ensuring that we Africans are well integrated in it. I think the answer to this question is that Africa, the West, and other partners must recognize and accept that times have changed. Africa, including Rwanda, is quite different from even just a decade or two ago. Today's challenges dictate different approaches, including a readiness to adapt and adjust to new circumstances. Our relations and respective roles should therefore reflect this reality. It is becoming clear that African countries are poised to play a more strategic role in reshaping and stabilizing the international landscape. This presents us with both challenges, but more importantly, opportunities. An opportunity to develop more diplomatic, political, and trade relations with African states, which, of course, with the corresponding challenge of redefining past and current approaches to foreign policy. In Africa's case, economic performance in the last decade gives the continent a unique opportunity to claim a more active role and a stronger bargaining position in the global arena. The continent's real GDP rose 409% every year from 2000 through to 2008, more than twice its pace in the 1980s and the 90s. Africa's collective GDP at 1.6 trillion US dollars in 2008 now matches some of the big BRICS economies like Brazil and Russia, and the continent is among the world's most rapidly growing economic regions. Africa's economic growth gained greatly from the surge in global commodity prices over the past decade. But it is not only resources that explain Africa's emerging strong position. The deliberate actions of individual governments to end political conflict and embrace democratic governance, lessons learned from the last 2 decades of the last century that have led to improved economic, macroeconomic conditions and a better business climate make diplomatic and business engagements with Africa imperative. Africa's growth is also increasingly being fueled by domestic, social, and demographic factors, such as increasing urbanization, a growing middle class, and an expanding and skilled labor force, all of which lead to greater consumption of goods and services. Today, there are 52 African cities with a population of more than 1 million people each. The urban and middle class population in Africa is about 40% of the continent's total. And it is projected that by 2020, people in this income category will have doubled, with a combined consumer spending of 1.4 trillion US dollars. Another important factor is that Africa is the center of the global supply chain, a strategic source of almost 40% of raw materials, agriculture, fresh water, and energy essential for global growth. In order to benefit from this position, Africa and African countries have to engage with trading partners on the basis of what is in their best interests. They must be strategic in their dealings and pursue partnerships where everyone involved has something to gain. It is not only Africa that can benefit from a new international reality. The West can also seize this opportunity to improve the economic climate and build better relations with Africa. European countries have commercial ties with Africa that go back centuries. If these are harnessed appropriately for mutual economic growth, then even the entrance of other players can be seen for what it really is: healthy and useful competition. Increase in trade on these terms will lead to less dependency on aid as a development tool, and see the rise of true partnerships. This way, we can all play our rightful roles in reactivating the world economic system. For African countries to be better integrated in the world economy and be able to influence its trend, we need to be stronger. We have to strengthen intra-African trade, communications infrastructure, and accelerate regional integration. Again, for Rwanda and indeed the rest of Africa to play their new role effectively, certain conditions must obtain. African governments have to be responsive to their people's needs and ensure that the gains of progress are shared fairly and that citizens participate meaningfully in their own governance. The repercussions of the refusal to heed the people's needs and the denial of a role in their own government are still fresh in our minds. We've seen what has been happening in the different parts of the world, especially in the north of our continent. But equally crucial for a mutual beneficial relationship between Europe and Africa, it is vital that the developed world begin to understand the different contexts within which African countries operate and respect the choices and will of the people. Systems of governance are built on the cumulative experience and circumstances of a nation and reflect what is generally accepted as good and workable for a particular people. In Rwanda, for instance, we have built modern institutions based on Rwandan traditional values, and they work for us. We devise our own strategies to answer our specific needs and accomplish what we want. For instance, performance contracts entered into between government and the people ensure delivery of services and promote accountability. Rwandans have a democracy that is responsive to the choices of our people and the fruits of which are measured at the grassroots level. Those that we work with, I think, will be able to acknowledge this. It is most helpful when initiatives that are centered on people and owned by the people themselves are supported rather than undermined, in most cases, by some who are not accountable themselves. The notion of big and small, rich and poor countries that gave some the right to determine the fate of others is not applicable in the new environment in which we find ourselves. We have to engage more meaningfully. Now is the time, therefore, to learn from one another, learn from the mistakes of the past, and essential truths of today, and have the courage to adjust our relations and accept our new roles. This does not mean that there will be no misunderstandings or difficulties between nations. There will be, and indeed Rwanda is no exception. Challenges are inevitable, but they can not hold us back. We have to move on. Distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, let me reiterate that Africa today is better placed to play a pivotal role in international affairs, but will only do so effectively as a partner in the true sense of the word. In the new reality, relations between nations and their respective roles cannot be built on expectation of favors or accepting a status quo that came to be at the will of some and without the consent of others. This is what should form the basis of a new international order, and we should use all the tools at our disposal, intellectual and diplomatic, to create it. Thank you for your kind attention, and I'm sure we will be very happy to share with you our perspectives further from comments or questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, thank you very much for this wide perspective on Africa and its future, and also a few indications you gave about your country. I'm going to open the debate by asking you one simple question. I think the question is simple to ask, probably not to answer. And it is the following one. As a former military, you know better than most people that organization is the crux of success in many things. if we talk about the role of Africa, the potential role of Africa in global governance, it's important to discuss how Africa is organized to have a weight in world affairs. And it seems to me that the part of the answer to this question is in Africa's hands and has to do with the regional organization of Africa, in particular the Organization of African States, maybe more regional organizations. And my impression is that in this respect, Africa so far is quite weak, not to say extremely weak. That's why I said that question is easy to ask and probably more difficult to answer. How do you assess the current ability of Africa to exert, to have influence in world affairs? And second, what kind of concrete path could you imagine to improve the situation?
First of all, I concur with what you say that there are weaknesses, but we should not allow being in this weak position to be, we should not allow this to be a permanent feature. We need to change it. And I think we are changing it. And for the pertinent question of organization, there are two levels in order for Africa probably to change this position of weakness to that of strength. One, it has to start from the national level, because Africa has 54 states. Before you even come to the continental strength of Africa, we need to start from the national strength. Therefore, even with organization, it is in the same way. We look at and encourage and work together to make sure that we see strengthening of the states at the national level, which then would feed feed into the strength of the continent. But in between, there is another phase that we have seen so far, and that is to do with other organizations in terms of integration, regional integration, and starting also with the regional economic communities. So between nation, state, there is the integration process at the regional level, and then going to the level of the continent. So that is what we have been doing maybe for the last decade or so, and acknowledging that there are these weaknesses, there is also a forward movement at these three levels. And I think that is what needs to be done for us to be able to fit properly in the new world order for Africa to have its voice as it should. There is a lot of work to do, evidently, but you have to keep those things in mind, that it is imperative that we, as Africans, participate in the new world order and do so effectively. But then we also have to recognize that there are these weaknesses that you have pointed to that are a reality that we need to deal with, and we need to deal with that at those three levels: national, sub-regional, and then continental.
Perhaps before I widen the discussion, still on the same subject, could you comment, in this respect, could you comment a little bit on two recent issues, one which is more or less solved and one which is not yet solved? The first one is the Ivory Coast. Do you think that Africa played a positive role in resolving the crisis? Question number one. And the second issue, which is of course a delicate one, is the issue of Libya.
Well, I think these are just examples of particular cases that maybe help elaborate the first question and the answer to it. I think what happened in Ivory Coast and later what happened in Libya, or maybe what may be happening in other places, like you would see in Somalia or in Sudan. You can look at these places and examples and get clearly to understand the weakness of the continent, and therefore it gives people ideas as to what needs to be really confronted. So Africa did not play its role effectively in dealing with these challenges. But at the same time, what is very interesting, as it displays the weaknesses of Africa, it also displays the weaknesses of the international system as a whole, beyond Africa. So they come up at the same time. For example, between Ivory Coast, Libya, and Somalia, and Sudan, you can see, if you will, first, the weaknesses of Africa. But number two, you look at the weaknesses of the global community, including the developed countries and the powerful countries. Why should they not be, say, addressing or helping to address the problem of Somalia, which affects the whole international system? Sometimes they talk about working together to deal with the issue, then another time they are doing it alone somewhere and not effectively even. Well, you can deploy so many different nation fleets in the waters around Somalia, as it has been done, but we haven't seen the decline of piracy or other problems. But if you go on those waters, you will see a lot of deployments there. Then on the ground in Somalia, AU has done its part to an extent. Some countries have deployed troops on the ground. They are there doing their best. They are not supported. They have no logistics. They have no... And then at another level, the international community is on the ground also supplying different things. And so it's total confusion, you can see. So there is no institution, that international or otherwise, that is calling things to order and saying, as you said rightly, in terms of organization, it is how do we organize ourselves, how do we organize our resources to make sure that we have maximum impact on the ground to bring change. It doesn't happen.
Do you have views on this? On what should be done?
Yes, what needs to be done actually has been mentioned in my speech. Yes. It's about accepting, certain responsibilities. And even though there are interests that I know of, but still the best way to serve any interest is recognition of certain realities and accept that we can depend on each other, we can work with each other, and not always bring into play this game of I am more superior to you, and even when what happens on the ground proves to you that even with your superiority you are not actually providing a solution. So it means we still have to work together. And in fact, if I may say, we either succeed together or we fail together. But we can easily avoid failing together by being better organized, by working together more effectively, by recognizing that there needs to be strong partnerships to answer some of these questions, and the outcomes being for the interest of all of us. So that is the way I see it, because it's simply some kinds of attitudes and mentality that are there undermining effectiveness on the ground, whether it is Ivory Coast or Libya. Sometimes you see it, if you look at it on the screen, you see a lot of confusion. Yes, you see a lot of name calling, this one didn't do this, he did this, then in the evening somebody goes in alone, and then, when he fails, blames the other, then, so it keeps. So.
What you said, Mr. President, makes me think of the situation of the euro today. So if you have some recommendation for us, please. That would be. Well, I'm going to give the floor in a second, but I would like to spend a few minutes, on the economic dimensions. And Bertrand, if you, I'd like to ask you, because your group, Lafarge, has been so much involved, you have bet on Africa in the last few years with quite a great success. And I would like to ask you how to react to President Kagame's speech, and what you think is going well and what is going less well in your judgment. Bertrand Collomb.
Well, we feel, like President Kagame, that Africa has been growing in the last few years, and that we see Africa as an end of opportunity, and we've been developing our business in Africa. It's not always simple everywhere, but even through there's no country in the world where things are simple. And so we always wonder why this image of Africa as not growing, not developing, is still there. And there's probably something to be done to promote a better image of Africa. And people, of course, focus on the disturbances, on the problems, on the turmoils, and they don't see the global picture, which is that there is some growth, and there is some improvement of governments, and there is some improvement of the economic situation. So and when we look at the future, it is clear that the increase of population is going to be bigger in Africa in the last 20 years than in any other part of the world. And so the potential for our business, which is cement and concrete, is a direct relationship with the population. And we see that the potential of Africa as being very significant.
Well, to add to that, let me just add to what he has said. You see, there are two people who he raises a good question. He says he wonders why there is this continued problem with the image. I think the problem is twofold, and therefore there are also two parties to deal with this issue. One is Africa itself. We, the Africans, really need to constantly do what is best for us and be responsive to the needs of our people and the imperatives of the global system that we have to fit in and share with others on the basis of international or universal values and so on and so forth. That is our responsibility. We have to keep trying to get better on everything. That's one. At the same time, it's also imperative on the other side, the other communities, the rest of the world, the rich world, and so on, to also make an effort, not only to encourage the positive developments, but also acknowledge them. Because sometimes the image is not formed on the basis of just ignorance. Sometimes it is deliberate. People sometimes don't want to accept what the situation is. They just don't want to accept it. It's not always because of ignorance. Because sometimes not accepting it is assumed to serve people's interests. To acknowledge that Africa can be a place of opportunity, can be a place to invest and make good business for whoever has invested there and for Africa to benefit as well. No, some people are stuck in a bit of history where it is always a place for problems of governance, for problems of human rights, for a humanitarian. Africa is a humanitarian case, and must remain so in some people's minds. So they don't. Some people, it works in their favor. It is another huge industry to make Africa remain to be seen like this. So there are these struggles that have to take place, and I think everyone has to change the approach and the attitude and the way of doing business.
Well, there are some people I don't know personally, so please introduce yourself, sir. Yeah.
Deux questions. La première, Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie. Alors, la place d'Afrique, c'est aussi parler aujourd'hui de l'Union africaine.
Two questions. The role of the African Union.
Non, pas trop vite, s'il vous plaît, parce que
C'est bon, il n'y a pas de souci.
ça va.
Alors, parler du rôle de l'Afrique,
I would like to
aussi revenir sur
say that when you talk about the role of Africa,
africaine pourrait avoir
it's tantamount to saying that the African Union has a role to play in this globalized world of ours. And my second point has to do with governance. What is your sense today as to how governance is moving ahead and is progressing in Africa today?
Well, I thought I answered all that, not only in my speech, but also in response to the earlier questions that were raised. So if we can probably reflect on that and we move on. But I think overall, in short, there is progress. But it is a slow progress. We need to move faster than we are probably moving. But I think there is a forward movement which we should appreciate.
Merci. Qui demande? Oui, mademoiselle, madame, oui. Allez-y, oui, vous avez une main levée, oui. Allez-y. Vous vous introduisez, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci beaucoup. My
Thank
name
you.
is Karina Tasakian from Human Rights Watch. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your speech. During your speech, you mentioned the importance of accountability and democracy and the need to listen to the people. And I know you've made these commitments many times before. And yet, following the elections of last year in Rwanda, in which you were re-elected for a second time, we have a situation 1 year on where there are still several members of opposition parties and journalists who are in prison, and where many ordinary Rwandans, not even the politicians, are afraid of expressing views that may be critical of the government. So I would just like to ask you how you square this with your commitments and what you plan to do in your current term to address this situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is only Human Rights Watch that never sees progress in Rwanda. But fortunately, in Rwanda, when we have elections, they don't vote. So those who vote are Rwandans. And when Rwandans vote, they say it in their voting. In fact, if yesterday you had come to a meeting. I had a meeting with Rwandans from across Europe. There were over 3,000 people in the room yesterday. I'm sure there are some people here who attended, who were there. People from Human Rights Watch should have been there to listen to these Rwandans, or should be in Rwanda to hear from the millions of Rwandans and what they say. What they say, how they feel, are entirely different from, completely different from what Human Rights Watch talks about. So when you say we have this in Rwanda, well, Human Rights Watch has this in Rwanda, no, but then Rwandans have a different thing. So I think that's what counts more, and that's what I go by. So we'll continue being friends with Human Rights Watch, but we'll also continue doing our best for our people and our people are happy with what they have or with what they are doing. And there are Rwandans here in the room who even belong to those groups you are talking about. The story they have about what you are talking about is different from indeed what you are talking about.
Bien. Monsieur, vous présentez, s'il vous plaît.
Hi, my name is Ambroise Pierre and I work for the Africa Desk of Reporters Without Borders. I would like to say that not only Human Rights Watch doesn't see the progress in Rwanda, but neither Reporters Without Borders. Annually,
You are the same, really.
Annually, as you know, we publish a press freedom index, and last year Rwanda was ranked 169 out of 178 countries. Every year, year after year, your government and the High Media Council criticize us, assuming that we don't know what's going on the ground. So I would just like to remind that this index is made out of the answers we get from people on the ground, local experts, lawyers, journalists, etc. Last year in 2010, 2 newspapers were suspended for 6 months, 5 months ahead your presidential election. A journalist was killed in Kigali, some others fled the country, and finally 2 lady journalists were arrested and they were given very harsh prison sentences, 17 years and 7 years. So I would like to, my question is simple and it will continue on the same issue. Economic development is great, accountability is great, but when will you consider that economic development and democracy goes with accepting being criticized by your people?
Before the president answers, let me remind you that here the French Institute of International Relations, and we have a subject for this meeting, which is the governance of Africa. So the president will answer, but I would like to invite questions which are related to the subject of this conference. Mr. President?
Thank you. I think that is helpful. As for the Reporters Without Borders, first of all, I'm not sure you even know where Rwanda is yourself, you personally. You've never been there, you don't know. In fact, I was surprised you didn't say Rwanda was found to be the 169th out of 168. Because that's how you look at things. But really, let me tell you, me, the government, the people of Rwanda are not answerable to you. They're answerable and accountable to Rwandans and the global international system, how we fit in it. And you are the kind of people I was talking about who attack countries, who do all sorts of things, when you are not accountable yourselves. I don't think you are accountable, and I'm not accountable to you. So, and when you say, yes, accountability good, then economic this good, what are you talking about? When accountability is good, then what are you talking about? Accountability involves human, economic, political processes. So if one is accountable, and accountable means you are accountable to people, then I don't understand what you're talking about. So if again, it fits in exactly the point of discussion somehow, because if we have people who want to manage Africa in this way, from outside, in disrespect of the views and the choices and the aspirations of African people, then that's exactly what I was pointing to. This attitude of always sizing up Africans, African leaders, African governments, African this, and well, that's why you become silent about many wrongs that go everywhere, even in your own backyard. And later on, some of the things have erupted in your face when you are looking. I think we need a bit of space ourselves, political space and breathing space to do our business. That I don't think I need anybody, or Rwandans need anybody to come and teach them about their human rights, because we are human. We know what it means. You can't teach a poor person how hunger bites, because they know it. So I know it. The Rwandans know it. We know better these problems that affect us. You don't know better than us.
Well, thank you very much. I think this is an important issue, and I think your answer is quite important. And I thank you. I would like to give the floor to Aline Leboeuf. Where is she?
Thank you. I'm Aline Leboeuf, researcher at IFRI. I would like to know how you see the relationship with the Democratic Republic of Congo today. Thank you.
We relate to and have very good relations with many countries on our continent and beyond. In that context, we relate very well with all our neighbors, including DRC. And we are making good progress, and we will continue to make good progress.
Dominique David. Ouais, ça fait rien.
Voilà. Mr. President, I'm Dominique David from IFRI. I will use the opportunity to ask my question in French, if you don't mind. It's a very simple question. Monsieur le Président, votre visite
Mr. President,
en France
your visit to
bien sûr
France
un
is,
événement
of course,
considérable.
a major event.
Et je voudrais vous poser une
And I would
question,
like to
je
put a
crois, qui est
question to
commune
you,
à
which
la
I
plupart des
think
personnes
most
dans
of the
cette
people
salle.
in the room are thinking about.
Pourriez-vous nous donner votre
Could you
appréciation
give us
des
your
relations actuelles
sense of
entre
present
la France
relations
et le
between
Rwanda
France
et
and
quelques
Rwanda?
commentaires sur leurs perspectives?
What outlook and what prospects would you say they have? And I'm glad to be able to put this question to you here in Paris at IFRI.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. The fact that you are able to put this question to me here in Paris at IFRI is in itself a statement that the prospect for a good relationship between Rwanda and France is becoming a reality. It's a process. We are working on that. I'm here on the invitation to come and visit. and during the visit, even if we didn't say anything, the very fact that I'm here and that I'm visiting speaks volumes. So we will add also to take advantage while we are here to discuss a broad range of issues that will help advance positively the relations, really not even just confined to Rwanda and France, but how that also strengthens other positive developments on our continent, and also between the continent and Europe, and also France playing a big part in that. So the prospect is good. It's very good. We are forward-looking. We want to move on and not be stuck in our history. I think that's the best thing that contributes to the well-being of everyone.
I would like, we have here the ambassador of Singapore, Ambassador Tan, and I would like to give him the floor for one simple reason, well, no, for two reasons. The first one is because he is a good friend. The second one is that the comparison is sometimes made between the ambitions of Rwanda and what has been achieved, especially through the leadership of Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. And I understand, Mr. President, that you yourself occasionally refer to the Lee Kuan Yew's example. So could you say a few words? And I think it would be interesting to have this aspect of our discussion, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm very honored to be here to listen to your speech this morning. We have very good relations with Rwanda for many years, and I think we treasure these relations. Well, Singapore, we have made quite good progress over the years, and we have learned a lot from other countries, and this is something that we are always.
Before you answer, Mr. President, when you look at President Kagame, do you recognize Lee Kuan Yew?
You don't look alike.
I think it's too easy to try to draw comparisons like this, but I think he's also, in my view, trying to bring about leadership and governance in his own ways to his country and perhaps in this region. Thank you.
Mr. President?
Well, maybe you might find similarities by listening, not by looking. But certainly we have enjoyed a good relationship with Singapore, and have learned a lot from there and continue to do so and continue to work together. But he raised a very important point that you may learn lessons from all over the world, but you end up, making it fit in your own circumstances and conditions. There is no one-size-fitting, or it's always about learning. It's a learning from different experiences, and there's a lot to learn from the experience of Singapore. But Rwanda cannot be Singapore. It can only have similarities with it, because we are a different kind of animal from the other. So, but it's all about how we really are ready to learn lessons and fit them in what makes the best for you.
Thank you very much. I think it's better for Rwanda to take Singapore as a role model than for Ceausescu to take North Korea and Kim Il Sung as his model, which he really did in the early 70s actually. So personally, I'm a great admirer of Singapore, and I think it's also in terms of size and so forth and so on. It's very interesting comparison, but of course the situations are very different. Now we are close to the end. I still give the floor to two persons, Madame, and then no, it's finished. I have and one Benoit Michel, and for the time reason we have to stop there. Please.
Good morning, Mr. President. Thank you. I'm Nelly Bertili from the World Bank, in charge of parliamentary relations. I first want to really commend what Rwanda has been doing in terms of parliamentary relations, especially in terms of advancement, gender, when it comes to parliament and capacity building. And my question relates to the role of parliaments and balance of power in Africa. Do you think that today parliaments and other constituents need to have stronger power in Africa? And should we also look for maybe rebalancing and revisiting the role of president and presidential power when in light of recent crises we've had in the continent?
Well, I think the right way to put it is appropriate power, because I know some people are allergic to using the word strong. Strong this, strong that has a connotation of not being democratic. I didn't create this. So whether you have a strong parliament or a strong president or a strong, there is a tendency of probably not appropriately using the word strong rightly. But beside that, I think, putting that aside, I think that is to the point. You need a balance. And I don't think we have come to a point where you need to discard this and in favor of this, because you would run into a danger of definitively saying this is the problem. But I think there is not a single problem. There are many problems that always come together. I don't think we have come to any point of either thinking about abolishing the institution of the executive, of the president, or come to the point, we haven't come to the point of saying let's abolish the parliament. I think each of these institutions play a very important role, and at one level a different role from the other. But what you need is making sure that each institution plays its role correctly, and then there has to be a correct balance. And I think where things have gone wrong, it's either because one institution has not played its role correctly, or there has not been a balance between the institutions that play their roles correctly. I think this is where the problem lies, in my view, and it is one of those problems that will continue to exist, but people need to keep working at some of these things.
Dernière question, Benoit Michel.
Mr. President, Benoit Michel, I'm working in the Secretary Center here in IFRI. You spoke about shared responsibility in terms of governance. So I would like to ask you a question concerning the United Nations. There are many peacekeeping operations going on in Africa. Some are long and difficult, some are more efficient. So in your opinion, how can the leaders in Africa and the United Nations try to improve this type of operations? Thank you.
I think it is one of those things Africa cannot tackle on its own, or I even don't think actually the weaknesses of peacekeeping operations arise from the responsibility of Africa alone, if at all. It's a combination of factors. In fact, you will find in many cases, more cases than not, or more often than not, there haven't been. I'm hesitant to say this, but I'm also feeling obliged to say it. But most of, if not all, these peacekeeping operations the UN has been deploying have really operated very poorly. You can look at different examples, and I would look at it in terms of the simple equation of what you put in and what you get out. What you put in terms of resources, we've seen billions of resources flowing into these operations. In terms of results, very, very small compared to this. And it almost, so UN is our organization. It belongs to all of us, but sometimes there are gray areas. You don't know even what you are talking about when you are talking about UN. And maybe that's why people escape a lot of responsibilities in between. If you look at, there are many operations that go on that don't serve well Africa. But the best thing to do, if we could do that, is to never need UN at all. If we could prevent crisis situations that need UN interventions, I think we are much better off that way. And when we have needed it, then we need to look at really how best to utilize the resources for a maximum benefit. I'll give you another example, even around the peacekeeping operations and other things. If you look at our the ICTR, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, to try people who committed genocide. For the time it has existed, which is more than 10 years, spending over $2 billion US, and trying only 52 cases about. Yes. So you can understand the implication of how inefficient we are. But people will sit there and feel good that they are doing a good job. That's fine. That's how the international system works. Yeah.
Well, Mr. President, it's time now to wind up. I would like first to thank you very much.